Hi, I'm Lou. Do you want to know how to rig a hammock? Great, you've come to the right place. So I love hammocks. There's just something so relaxing about hanging out in a hammock, staring up at the woodland canopy, listening to the air blowing through the trees, and it's just, oh, it's so nice. It's also my favourite way of sleeping in the woods because it's just so much more comfy than sleeping on the floor. At Forest School, we might not be using the hammocks as sleeping systems, but there are a whole range of other things that hammocks are really good for. In my experience with different groups, you tend to have the two extremes of how hammocks are used. The first is perhaps a more vigorous way of swinging in them, which is great, of course, for physical development. If you think of little children, even trying to get in and out of a hammock, as well as kind of trying to coordinate themselves to swing, or sometimes they push each other to make it swing. There's a lot of kind of fine and gross motor skills being developed there. There is also using a hammock as kind of a relaxing and a chill out and a calm down place. And what I've noticed with some groups, and particularly with groups that might have emotional difficulties or struggle to kind of keep their emotions in check, is that a hammock can be a really good coping mechanism that they can self-select. And I've known several learners where, the hammock is the place that they will take themselves off to kind of calm and chill out. And I've noticed it being a really effective tool for that as well. I don't know if there's any actual research out there, but I kind of associate hammocks with perhaps that kind of cradling feeling of being supported and being gently rocked, almost like a baby being soothed by its mother. And I wonder whether there's some sort of primal link in our brain to that sort of motion and feeling safe and secure. So it can be a really useful tool for that. So we better get on and show you how to rig one, because they're great for using at Forest School. So the first thing we need to do is find a safe, appropriate space to rig the hammock. So there are certain kind of features that we're looking for, and we'll do a little mini risk assessment on the immediate area. So the first thing is that you're going to need two trees that are roughly the right distance apart for your hammock. If they're too close together, you'll end up with a bit of a banana effect on your hammock. If they're too far apart, your ropes might not reach, or if they do, they might stretch so much that you're scuffing the floor. So I start by looking for the trees that are the right distance apart. As a tip, when you are looking for trees, I would recommend looking for trees that have got thicker barks, just to minimise any damage that the ropes might do around the trees. So we've got here a couple of lovely larch trees that have got bark that's plenty thick enough. We also want to look up above us and check that there's no hanging deadwood, nothing that we might disturb by rocking the trees and that will come down on our heads. So we want to make sure there's nothing like that up there. And then we also want to look below us and check that the ground is going to be soft enough for us in case anybody falls out, or in case anything snaps or anything like that. Hopefully it won't, but you want a nice soft landing in case. So a nice woodland floor tends to be nice and springy. We also want to check that there's nothing sharp or hard that we might fall on. So before rigging the hammock, I do recommend clearing away some of the bigger sticks, and particularly if there was anything pointing vertically up, then I would definitely clear that away or use a different area. So next we want to check our kit and equipment that we're going to be using. So I've got here a hammock which is made by DD Hammocks. It's what they call their Scout hammock, which I find quite an affordable hammock for Forest School. I use a different one if I'm sleeping out in my personal kit, but these ones are quite good for play hammocks at Forest School, and they're not too expensive either. So they come in this handy little stuff sack, which is useful for storage, keep your kit nice and neat. And we'll get it out. There we go. We can see it's all there. So I recommend giving the ropes a good check to make sure that there's no damage to them and that they're safe to use. So I do this by running the rope through my hands so I can feel it as well as see it as a visual inspection. And I'm just looking to make sure that all the braids are intact, that there's nothing that is so worn that it's worn through. What I've noticed with hammocks is that because sometimes they get used very vigorously at Forest School by the children, out of all the rope stuff we do, the ropes on the hammocks are the ones that are most likely to need replacing. And sometimes, like, the amount of friction causes so much heat that the ropes start to melt. Basically, the plastic in the ropes start to melt. I've brought you out an example of an old rope, which in the picture here you can see is on the right hand side, the red rope, where this is an old rope that's been used for hammocks, and you can see that the fibres are starting to wear through. It's all very fluffy. There are patches on it where it's gone very shiny, which is where the plastic has melted. And what we want is something like this nice green rope where all the fibres are intact, and there might be small areas where you can see that there's a bit of wear and tear, but the fibres aren't severed, which is the key thing to look for. Something else worth mentioning is that there are different ways of rigging a hammock. So I'm just going to show you the way that I prefer to rig. And I rig mine so that there's just one piece of cord coming out of each end of the hammock, because I like to use a timber hitch as the knot around the tree. So I just want one end. Some people prefer to have two ends and rig it in a slightly different way, which is absolutely fine as long as it's secure. There are lots of different ways, lots of different preferences. So in order to get one line coming off of my hammocks, I've used the bowline knot to create a fixed loop at the end that the hammock is attached to the rope, and in that way I've got just one end. Even though this cord is comparatively thin compared to a big chunky rope, the breaking strain is still very high, so it's been woven in a certain way so that it will easily take the weight of a grown adult, so it's still plenty strong enough with just one of the ropes. It's also a flat cord, and that gives you more friction around the tree and also causes less damage to the tree from rubbing as well. So a flat piece of cord is better than a round one. So to rig the hammock, we're going to attach each of the lines around each of the trees using a timber hitch. Now, you could use other knots if you want, but the key thing is that they need to be secure, really secure, when the hammock's under tension and under weight. And I would also recommend strongly choosing a knot that is very easy to undo, because the amount of force that's being applied to the knot and to the ropes, if you use the wrong knot, then you might end up having to cut your ropes because you'll never get certain knots undone. So the reason I choose the timber hitch is it's incredibly strong when it's under force, and it's very, very easy to undo. And touch wood, I've never had to cut a rope off when a timber hitch has been used, because it always undoes. So that's why I use a timber hitch. Now, I tend to rig about chest height to the tree. So depending on who's going to be in the hammock, whether it's me or a smaller person, would depend on where I start putting the rope. If my trees were very far apart, my rope's going to be more likely stretched, and so I need to make sure that I rig it higher to allow for that stretch as well. So I'm going to take my rope around the tree at chest height. Okay. And then I'm going to tie myself a timber hitch. So I will hopefully be making some knot videos at some point soon. So when I've done the timber hitch one, I will put the link into the description below. But for now, you can watch me on this video. So to do the timber hitch, I'm going to take my working end under and back towards itself. And then I'm going to wrap it around itself a number of times. And it's always easier to tie the first rope off because the hammock's not under any tension at the moment. So I'm going to keep wrapping. And you want to make sure that those wraps are well spaced out so that they're not all bunched together, that they're spaced out in a nice long way. With fat trees like this, I make sure that I go around at least half the circumference of the tree trunk. If it was a slightly smaller tree, I would make sure I went around the whole of the circumference to make sure you've got enough friction for the knot to hold. And as a tip, when you are picking the tree diameter that you're attaching to, I use as a rough guide the trunk of a person that's going to be in the hammock as a minimum size for the tree that I'm rigging my hammocks to. At the moment, my trunk is a bit bigger than normal, so I've gone for really hefty trees. So tying off the second rope of a hammock is a little bit more tricky than the first one because we need to keep the hammock nice and tight as we tie it, because we want to minimise as much sagging as possible because the ropes will stretch, as I mentioned before, when we're in it. So I tend to try and rig my hammock as tight as possible. So I'm going to take my rope over to the next tree whilst pulling on it to keep it tight, and then walk it around the tree so I can use the friction of that tree trunk to hold the rope in place. Give it a good tug, and then we're going to use the timber hitch again. So I'm going to take the rope over and bring it back towards itself, still holding on to that tension. So a little tip about tying the timber hitch, because it's quite tight around the trunk now, is you will always have like this little triangular gap next to where the rope meets the tree. And that's a really good gap to be able to then put your working end through to do the wraps of the timber hitch. So I'm going to use that to post my end through and then pull it along the trunk so that it has the friction next to the bark. If you've got a thick barked tree that has got gaps, you can also use those in the same way. Put the end through the gap and then pull it along so that the cord sits flush with the bark. And again, I'm going to go at least halfway around the circumference of this big tree. Thinner trees, you would go round the whole way. And there we go, all nice and tightly tied. So now your hammock's all rigged, we're nearly ready to get in it. But before I do that, I want to make sure that my knots are sturdily tied and that it's going to hold my weight. So I'm going to do that by testing it, by pushing down with my hands. I could lie over it like this, and I can feel and hear that the cords are stretching. Ideally, I want to do this until I can take my feet off of the ground so that I know it's taking my whole weight. This is also giving the ropes a chance to stretch and to kind of get into a position so that it doesn't suddenly drop when you actually sit in it. So give it a good kind of test, bounce a bit on it, and make sure that it's ready to take passengers. So now we're ready to get in and try the hammock. One of the dangers of using hammocks can be getting in and out of them, which is like the trickiest parts of them. Of course, they're wobbly and they move, and it has been known for people to kind of tip themselves backwards, which we don't want the children at forest school doing because they could bang their heads. It could be a bit nasty. So there's a little tip to kind of minimise the chances of that. So what you want to do is you want to use your hands to push down so that you kind of get your bum on the bottom edge. And then, because these are nice big hammocks, you can take the back of it all the way up to your shoulders. And so in that way, if you were to kind of fly back, it's going to catch you. You're not going to go flying off. So you can then take your feet off the ground like this. And of course you can sit in it like a seat like this, which I know is very popular with the children at forest school because they use it like a swing. But like now I'm really quite stable because I've got it over my shoulders. So if I do want to have a little lay down, I can then just shuffle round, lift my legs in and get nice and comfy, which is good for me. Might have a little kip. Oh, that's nice. So then getting out of a hammock is the same process but in reverse. So if you're lying down, just swing your legs down. And then before you try to jump out, just make sure you've got the back up over your shoulders, just in case you were to go backwards, and then you can kind of jump out. So there's a few tips on how to get in and out of a hammock. Not so easy when you're 9 months pregnant either. So have you used a hammock at forest school? Or do you rig your hammock in a different way? Do let me know in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this video, do give us a like and subscribe so you can join me in the woods next time. And thanks for watching. Chilling out in a hammock totally rocks. Just make sure you use the right knots. Relax, chill out and shoot the breeze. Feel safe and secure in the arms of the trees.